I got slapped twice by my mother just for using an extra sanitary pad. That was the day I swore to God I would never be poor again. So, when I managed to hook Carter Vance, my billionaire benefactor, I used every trick in the book to chase away every other pretty little thing around him. Everyone in our circle thought I was going to be the future Mrs. Vance. They even teased us at a private party last night. I heard Carter placed a blind max bid at a charity auction last night just to get a legendary diamond ring. The next second, Carter gently slipped that breathtaking, fiery diamond onto my finger. My heart hammered against my ribs. Just as I thought all my scheming had finally paid off, Carter's deep voice echoed in my ear. "Do you like your breakup gift?" I froze, looking up in daze. Right then, the door pushed open, and a timid-looking girl walked in. Carter set down his Cuban cigar. "I'm getting married, Cassie. Tell me what else you want. Let's end this on a good note." I sized the girl up. A white dress, innocent eyes, looking like a helpless puppy. Yet, the no-makeup eyeliner she wore was drawn more flawlessly than a professional's. So, I swallowed the words villa, sports car, and millions in cash that were about to burst out of my mouth. Instead, I squeezed out a single, fragile tear, took off the sparkling ring, and placed it gently back on the table. Only a bride needs a wedding ring. Keep it for her. Seeing the hesitation that flashed through his eyes, I smiled softly. "Congratulations on your wedding, Mr. Vance. What's more lethal than a fake, innocent girl? A gold digger's seemingly genuine heart." My reaction caught everyone in the room off guard. Carter lit a cigarette, his tone suddenly feeling a bit distant. "Cassie, I thought you loved money more than anything." As the smoke swirled, my mind drifted back to the year I first met him. I had just escaped my toxic home. I couldn't even scrape together a few $1,000s for my college tuition, and I was sobbing, squatting by the university gates. He was there as a guest speaker. Walking past, his strong hand steadied me and pulled me up. When I looked up, I locked eyes with his amused, handsome face. I didn't tell him about my gambling addict of a father, my weak mother, or my greedy brother. That story was too cliché. I only said 5 words. "I just want some money." He laughed, just as he did now. "Money is the only thing I have plenty of." A blank check was stuffed into my bag back then. But now, Carter waved his hand to the girl at the door. "Chloe, come sit by me." I glanced at the numbers on the check in my hand, a mix of affection and bitter jealousy rising in my chest. He always called me by my full name, Cassie. But for Chloe, he used a sweet nickname. Seeing how cozy they were, the guys in the room immediately started cheering. "First time meeting her, shouldn't we toast the future Mrs. Vance?" Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. "Carter, I don't really drink." I heard Cassie has a high tolerance. "Could she please drink this shot for me?" She held her glass with such clumsy innocence that for a second, I actually wondered if I had misjudged her. But the moment those words left her mouth, my doubts vanished. This petty little trick wouldn't even rank in the top 10 compared to the other women I had chased away from Carter over the years. Carter didn't say no. He just tilted his chin toward me. But he knew damn well I had just been discharged from the hospital last month for a severe stomach ulcer. Back in the hospital room, his tone had been impatient but his eyes were unusually tender. "Do you think you're invincible? Stop drinking for me at business dinners." I actually thought that was his unspoken way of caring for me. Now, I looked at the glass of neat, burning whiskey in front of me. One shot wouldn't kill me. The silence stretched. Just when everyone thought I was going to embarrass Carter by refusing, I smiled. "I'll drink it for her. Consider it my way of thanking you, Carter, for taking care of me all these years." With that, I grabbed the entire decanter and chugged it right in front of Carter's shocked eyes. Before I could even process the burn, Carter frowned deeply and snatched the bottle away. There was a rare, frantic panic in his voice. "Are you insane? Go throw it up. Cassie, would you literally die for some cash?" I laughed and brushed his hand away. I pulled the check out of my purse. Asterisk rip. Rip. Asterisk. The multi-million-dollar check was torn into halves, then quarters, and casually tossed onto the floor. "Mr. Vance, after all these years with you, I've already made enough. The reason I stayed was never about the money. If it wasn't for the money, then what was it for?" The entire room went dead silent. No one dared to ask. Even Carter pressed his lips into a tight line. Having been with him for 5 years, everyone in the city's high society knew how much I loved money. Carter used to pinch my cheek and laugh. "Cassie, are you a black hole? You only take money in, never let it out." Yet, he was also the one who spoiled me the most, sending endless designer bags to my door. He had even transferred the luxury penthouse in the city center under my name. No one had ever treated me that well. I thought it was love. Looking back, those things were probably just breadcrumbs he threw to a pet bird, entirely insignificant to him. Just as Carter was about to speak, Chloe's eyes suddenly turned red next to him. "Carter, it's so stuffy in here. Can you take me outside for some fresh air?" The hesitation in Carter's eyes vanished. He picked Chloe up in his arms. I watched his retreating back, the bitterness boiling in my chest again. Under the cold night sky, I hailed a cab and sent my penthouse's details to a real estate agent. Hearing that I wanted a quick sale, the agent asked for the reason. Before I could reply, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a wire transfer from Carter. He said nothing, but he transferred double the amount of that torn check. I accepted it without a shred of guilt. Since the love was gone, I might as well keep the money. I pushed open the door to my penthouse quietly. The two people on the living room sofa clearly didn't hear me come in. Carter's face was filled with unmasked pleasure as he leaned down, whispering sweet nothings to the girl. Carter had been treated like a king since childhood. He was never one to care about others' feelings in bed. He took what he wanted, and I never had the right to say no. Yet, when Chloe tearfully pushed him away, he merely frowned with restraint. He was actually coaxing her gently. I let out a self-deprecating laugh and quietly stepped back out, closing the door. Leaning against the doorframe in the hallway, the faint sounds from inside pierced my heart, over and over. I closed my eyes and counted the seconds, calculating how many more zeros I should demand for this. Finally, the storm subsided. Carter opened the door, the fresh scratch marks on his abs painfully visible. Am I interrupting you too? Hearing my flat tone, Carter's brows furrowed. After all, I used to be the one who threw tantrums and acted clingy whenever other women tried to get close. Chloe isn't feeling well, and this place is close to the city hospital. You need to pack your things and move out so she can stay here. My hands clenched into tight fists. I had once half-jokingly told Carter about my terrible family. Back then, his tone was completely indifferent. Cassie, I don't like women who play the victim to get my sympathy. Yet, on my 23rd birthday, he was also the one who gifted me this very apartment. Just because you didn't have a home growing up doesn't mean you can't build one for yourself in the future, he had said. But now, he was giving this home to another woman. And I could only smile and say, okay. Chloe, draped in Carter's suit jacket, blushed. I'm so sorry, Cassie. I didn't know this was your place. I glanced at the countless high heels in the shoe rack, and then at the framed photo of Carter and me hanging in the hallway. Your eyesight must be pretty bad, Miss Chloe. Chloe's eyes welled up with tears instantly. The next second, Carter pulled her into his arms, his voice icy. She's just a young girl throwing a little tantrum, and you have to make a scene. Cassie, know your place. Apologize to her. For years, I had used Carter's influence to play the queen bee in high society. This was the first time he had ever used this tone with me for another woman. I took a deep breath, forcing a bright smile. My apologies, Miss Chloe. I'll pack my things right now so I don't get in your way. Apparently not expecting me to back down so easily, a storm of complicated emotions flickered in Carter's eyes. Cassie, I didn't tell you to leave completely. My heart leaped for a fraction of a second. But the next moment, he said, Chloe needs to recover here for a couple of days. You stay and take care of her. A smug gleam flashed in Chloe's eyes. Sorry to trouble you, Cassie. Without a word, I walked up to her and reached out my hand. Chloe froze. Even Carter thought I was going to slap her and instinctively stepped in to block me. But I merely gently touched the diamond studs on her earlobes. These diamonds cost about $15,000. They're the most expensive pair on my vanity table. You have good taste, Chloe. If you want to play the innocent virgin, at least hide your greedy claws. Chloe's smile froze, her face turning pale. Carter's brows knitted as he looked at Chloe, a hint of suspicion arising in his eyes for the first time. I'm sorry, Cassie. I just grabbed them randomly. I didn't give her a chance to explain. I swiftly packed my things and cleared out of the master bedroom. The master bedroom is yours now. The sheets are freshly changed. I glanced at her hands. Your hands are so clean and soft. I doubt you even know how to make a bed. Carter stayed silent, his fingers tapping on the table, a habit of his when he was thinking deeply. Except for me, he had never met a genuinely poor person in his life. Now, he was probably realizing that a truly broke, struggling girl next door couldn't possibly have hands without a single callus. After all, he used to grab my hands with feigned disgust and tease. Cassie, your hands are rougher than my grandmother's. Yet, he was also the one who constantly had luxury hand creams delivered to me. Carter suddenly spoke up. I'll buy this penthouse back from you at double the market price. I'll transfer the funds immediately. Cassie, stop throwing a tantrum. Checking the transfer notification on my phone and counting the zeros, I smiled. But the satisfaction in my heart was hollow. After packing, I went into the kitchen to brew some hangover cure tea. The shower in the bathroom started running. I turned around. Chloe was standing right behind me, her sweet expression replaced by a dark scowl. Cassie, do you think you're so smart? I silently glanced at the hidden camera I had installed in the corner of the kitchen and said nothing. She was too young. She didn't understand that in my line of work, keeping receipts and evidence was everything. The very next day after this apartment was transferred to my name, I had installed 360-degree hidden cameras in every corner. Seeing my silence, Chloe's arrogance grew. I know you chased away a lot of his exes, but so what? In the end, I'm the one who's going to marry him and become Mrs. Vance. Cassie, do you hate me? I calmly turned off the stove. Yeah, I do. Startled by my blunt confession, Chloe blinked. I raised my voice slightly, making sure the camera captured every word clearly. He hates anything sour. Put extra honey in his hangover tea. He prefers strawberry-scented, ultra-thin condoms. And his favorite position is. Chloe's face grew uglier with every word. My tone, however, dropped into a perfectly tragic sadness. Future Mrs. Vance, please take good care of him from now on. Hearing the shower stop, I poured the hot tea into a bowl and handed it to her. In that exact split second, Chloe's expression warped. She reached out and violently grabbed my wrist. In the scuffle, she threw herself heavily onto the floor, letting out a sharp, pathetic scream. Under her force, the boiling hot tea splashed entirely onto my arm. Heavy footsteps rushed in. Carter ran into the kitchen, his brow furrowed. My arm felt like it was on fire. The blistering pain set in instantly. At this very moment, I desperately wanted to know. Between a 5-year relationship and a girl he had known for less than 2 months. Who would he choose? The next second, Carter scooped Chloe up in his arms, his face written with pure worry. He looked at me with cold, unfamiliar eyes. Cassie, have I spoiled you so much over these years? That you've completely forgotten your place and started acting like a monster? But Chloe hadn't even said a word yet. My fantasy of pulling out the camera footage and exposing her frame job suddenly felt incredibly pathetic. Because she didn't have to say anything. Carter just chose to believe her. I felt incredibly ridiculous, so I actually laughed out loud, even as tears silently spilled from the corners of my eyes. Yeah. I forgot my place. It won't happen again. Because, at this very moment, I decided I didn't want it next time anymore. A flicker of some unreadable emotion crossed Carter's eyes. He didn't reply. He carried Chloe out to tend to her leg, which was barely even bruised. It was as if he didn't even see the massive, horrific red burn spreading across my arm. I let out a soft sigh. Young girls really don't know how to control their strength. Thank God I turned off the heat early. Yet, I didn't know why this hot soup felt like it had been poured directly onto my heart. It burned, and it ached. After cleaning up the kitchen, there was a knock on the door. It was Carter's assistant, delivering medicine. The expensive burn ointments in his hand were hard to miss. I instinctively reached out, but the assistant pulled them back awkwardly. I'm sorry, Miss Cassie. These are all for Miss Chloe. Mr. Vance said Miss Chloe was splashed by the soup and needs to prevent scarring. I pulled my hand back, embarrassed. Oh. My bad. Go on in. Back in my temporary bedroom, I grabbed my phone and sent a confirmation message to the real estate agent. The apartment was gone, the car would be sold tomorrow. There was nothing left for me in this city. I sent a message to the study abroad agency I had consulted a long time ago. My budget was high, so they confirmed my application almost instantly. Throughout my entire college life, I was constantly running after money. I had never actually experienced the freedom of being a carefree student. I had almost forgotten that I was still young. I could still live for myself. The next morning, I was jolted awake by a sharp, agonizing pain in my scalp. I forced my eyes open. My biological father's nightmarish face was hovering right in front of me, more terrifying than any ghost. He was violently dragging me up by my hair. You little bitch. I wondered where the hell you ran off to all these years. Turns out you've been whoring yourself out to some rich guy. Have you no shame? I struggled in terror. The childhood trauma of almost being sold off to an old man rushed back instantly. Let go of me. As my mind cleared, I caught sight of a familiar figure leaning against the doorway. Instinctively, I cried out. Carter. Help me. But the next second, the billionaire calmly lit a cigarette. Cassie, you made Chloe cry so bitterly. You need to learn a lesson. My father's face twisted into an even uglier sneer. You stupid brat, how do you think I found you? You're so dirty now, I'd be embarrassed to even use you to pay off my debts. Through the rising cigarette smoke, Carter's face became blurry. I couldn't tell if the brief flash of pity on his face was just my imagination. Chloe poked her head out from behind Carter. Cassie, no matter what, you can't just abandon your own father. I went to a lot of trouble to track your dad down for you, you know. With that, the door slammed shut. In that moment of absolute despair, I reached under my pillow and pulled out a long kitchen knife I had hidden there. Just like in the countless nightmares I had over the years, I pressed the sharp blade hard against my father's throat. The man's eyes widened in sheer terror. His body, withered from years of alcohol and smoking, was no match for my physically fit body, which I had trained for years just for this day. By the time the police dragged him away, a sudden realization hit me. The home I had searched for, the warmth I had clung to, the nightmare I had run from. They were all nothing but a joke. That very night, I boarded a one-way flight to New York. But I left Carter a parting gift. I had uploaded the kitchen camera footage to his smart TV stream, and laid out all the background info on Chloe, which I had paid a private investigator to dig up, right on his coffee table. Looking at the paused TV screen in the living room, Carter froze, his finger hovering over the play button. Next to him, Chloe shrieked, "No. Don't watch it. The silence inside the penthouse living room didn't just fall, it calcified. Carter's thumb stayed frozen over the brushed metal remote. On the 85-inch OLED screen mounted against the slate gray accent wall, the paused image showed a wide-angle overhead view of the kitchen. The timestamp in the corner glowed in faint phosphor green, 11:42 p.m. last night. Carter, please. Don't look at it. Chloe lunged across the Italian leather sofa. Her fingers, manicured in that deceptively modest shade of milky pink, clawed desperately for the remote. The innocent, fragile tremor in her voice had vanished, replaced by the shrill, ragged pitch of an animal backed into a corner. Carter didn't flinch. He didn't even shift his posture. He simply raised his left forearm, catching Chloe's wrists with a grip so sudden and unyielding that she gasped, the breath knocked out of her chest. Sit down, he said. His voice was terrifyingly level, drained of any inflection. She faked it. Carter, you know how manipulative Cassie is. She's lived in the gutter. She knows how to edit videos. She knows how to set people up. Click. Carter pressed play. The surround sound speakers built into the ceiling delivered the audio with crystal clarity. The low hiss of the gas stove. The soft bubbling of the hangover tea. Then, Chloe's voice drifted through the room, sharp, biting, and dripping with venom. Cassie, do you think you're so smart? I know you chased away a lot of his exes. But so what? In the end, I'm the one who's going to marry him and become Mrs. Vance. On the screen, Cassie stood by the stove, her back straight, her hair tied in an uncharacteristically messy bun. She turned the burner down. Her face in profile was pale, exhaustion shadowing the hollows under her cheekbones. Yeah. I do, Cassie's recorded voice replied, flat and devoid of venom. He hates anything sour, Cassie continued calmly on the screen, pouring the amber liquid into a porcelain bowl. Put extra honey in his hangover tea. He prefers strawberry-scented, ultra-thin condoms. And his favorite position is shut up. Chloe's recorded scream cut through the speakers. Then came the movement that stopped Carter's heart. On screen, Cassie picked up the steaming bowl with both hands and stepped forward to hand it over. Chloe didn't take the bowl. Instead, her hands shot out like vipers, clamping tightly onto Cassie's left wrist, yanking Cassie forward with explosive, premeditated force. In the same violent motion, Chloe threw her own hips backward, deliberately crashing herself onto the tiles while using Cassie's momentum to tip the boiling liquid squarely over Cassie's exposed forearm. A sickening splash. A brief, muffled gasp from Cassie as the scalding tea soaked through her skin. Then, Chloe's theatrical wail, "Ah. Carter, it hurts." The screen showed Carter bursting into the kitchen seconds later. It showed the pure, unhesitating fury in his eyes as he shoved Cassie out of the way, almost knocking her raw, blistering arm against the marble counter edge, to scoop Chloe into his arms. It showed Cassie standing alone in the corner of the frame. Her left arm was already swelling into violent, angry crimson blotches, the skin weeping from the heat. Yet she had simply stood there, laughing quietly at the absurd cruelty of it all, a single tear cutting through the dust on her cheek. Cassie, have I spoiled you so much over these years that you've completely forgotten your place and started acting like a monster? Carter's recorded voice thundered from the speakers. The Carter on the couch watched the Carter on the screen with an expression that looked like a man watching himself drink poison. Click. The screen went black. The living room was so quiet that the faint hum of the central air conditioner sounded like a jet engine. Carter slowly lowered the remote to the glass coffee table. Beside it lay the thick manila envelope Cassie had left behind. He didn't look at Chloe, who was now trembling violently on the floor, her face drained of all color. He reached out and untied the string on the envelope, sliding out the contents with steady, terrifyingly deliberate fingers. 8 glossy photographs slid onto the glass. They weren't pictures of an innocent, broke college girl from a rural town. They were high-resolution candid shots from high-end clubs in Macau, Las Vegas, and Miami. In them, Chloe, wearing heavy, professional makeup and designer clothes she had claimed she could never afford, was laughing in the VIP booths of known predatory wealth hunters. Beneath the photos were bank transaction records. Chloe hadn't met Carter by chance outside his corporate headquarters during a rainstorm. She had paid $15,000 to a concierge service to obtain his personal weekly schedule. And at the very bottom of the stack was a bank receipt, a $5,000 transfer to a local private investigator with the memo line, "Locate biological father of Cassie Lynn." Carter stared at that single line of text for a long, unbroken minute. The air in his lungs felt like crushed glass. Yesterday morning, he had leaned against the bedroom doorway, smoking a cigarette, watching Cassie's abusive, degenerate father drag her across the floor by her hair. He had thought he was teaching her a lesson in humility. He had watched her eyes widen in primal terror, watched her look at him as if he were her last savior on earth, and he had calmly blown smoke toward the ceiling. You made Chloe cry so bitterly. You need to learn a lesson. Those had been his exact words. He had handed the knife to her executioner, thinking he was merely disciplining a petulant, spoiled mistress who had overstepped her boundaries. Carter. Chloe's voice cracked. She crawled toward his knees, tears finally real this time, born of pure, unadulterated panic. Listen to me, that's not what it looks like. I only did it because I loved you. She was draining your money for 5 years, she's a ruthless gold digger. I just wanted to protect you from her. Carter finally turned his head. His eyes were bloodshot, the pupils dilated until the dark brown iris was almost swallowed by black. When his gaze fell upon Chloe, it held neither anger nor disgust. It held the utter, vacant chill reserved for roadkill. Get your hands off my trousers, he said softly. Chloe froze. Her fingers slipped from the hem of his slacks as if scorched. Carter stood up. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. The sun was rising, casting a dirty orange glare across the steel and glass towers of the city. 5 years. 5 years ago, a girl had knelt by a university gate, her coat thin, her knuckles red from the biting frost, asking for nothing more than money. Over 5 years, she had accompanied him to every brutal business banquet, drinking raw grain alcohol until her stomach lining ulcerated, just so the conservative old partners wouldn't look down on him. She had guarded his interests like a feral wolf, tearing down every opportunistic socialite who tried to slide into his bed, playing the villain so he could keep his hands clean. And he had convinced himself that she only stayed because of the black cards, the penthouse, and the diamond studs. The reason I stayed was never about the money. Her voice from the charity gala echoed in his skull like a physical blow. Harrison, Carter said into his phone, having dialed his chief of security, without taking his eyes off the window. Yes, Mr. Vance. The girl in the penthouse, Carter said, his voice flat and dead. Have her removed. Take back the jewelry, the clothes, the watches. Freeze the accounts. Opened under her secondary identity. And notify our legal team to file criminal charges for fraud, trespassing, and intentional infliction of bodily harm. Chloe screamed, scrambling to her feet. Carter. You can't do this to me. We're supposed to get married. My family. Carter didn't turn around. 2 stone-faced security guards in black suits pushed through the heavy double doors, flanking Chloe instantly. Her shrieks dissolved down the long marble corridor outside, fading into frantic, muffled thuds until the heavy oak doors clicked shut once more. The penthouse was empty. Carter walked back to the center of the room. His gaze fell upon the dining table. There, sitting on a single paper napkin, was the 15-carat fiery diamond ring he had bought at the charity auction. Next to it was the deed to the penthouse, signed cleanly and unequivocally back to his name. Beside the papers lay an empty white box. It was the burn ointment his assistant had brought up the night before. The tube inside had never been opened. The Boeing 777 hit a pocket of turbulence over the North Atlantic, the cabin gently shuddering in the dim amber cabin light. Cassie sat in 24A, her forehead resting against the cold double-paned acrylic of the window. Below, through breaks in the thick cloud deck, the dark, churning expanse of the ocean was invisible, swallowed by midnight. Her left arm throbbed rhythmically. She had wrapped it in gauze at the airport pharmacy before clearing security, a quick, rough job using cheap sterile pads and medical tape. The blisters had burst under the friction of her wool sweater during the security screening, leaving a raw, weeping circle of flesh that stuck to the cotton. It hurt, but the pain was grounded, real, and entirely hers. It was a physical ache that proved she was still breathing, still functional. On the drop-down tray in front of her lay a new, unregistered prepaid smartphone. Her old phone, containing 5 years of Carter's messages, the contacts of city socialites, the real estate agents, and the frantic voicemails her mother had left demanding money for her brother's wedding, was currently lying at the bottom of a trash compactor in Terminal 3. She opened the small leather notebook she had purchased at the duty-free shop. On the first page, she had written 3 numbers. 1. For $1,850,000, the net liquid capital in her offshore account, accumulated from 5 years of Carter's lavish gifts, liquidated investments, and the final wire transfer he had thoughtlessly sent to pay her off. 2. $42,000, her prepaid annual tuition for the master's program in applied economics and cultural preservation at Columbia University. 3. 0. The number of people in the world who currently knew where she was. Cassie closed the notebook, leaning her head back against the thin polyester Headrest. A passing flight attendant noticed the tight line of her jaw and the faint sweat on her temples. "Excuse me, miss? Are you feeling all right? Would you like a glass of water, or perhaps an aspirin?" Cassie opened her eyes. For 5 years, her smile had been a calculated weapon, sharp, dazzling, calibrated to disarm high society wives and intimidate gold-digging debutantes. But looking at the tired, kind middle-aged flight attendant, her lips curved into something small, fragile, and utterly human. "A glass of cold water would be wonderful," Cassie said in smooth, unaccented English. "Thank you." When the water arrived, she drank it slowly, feeling the chill slide down her throat, settling the lingering nausea from the cheap whiskey she had downed the night before. She wasn't running away. Running away implied cowardice, a retreat from a battle lost. Cassie had never lost a battle she chose to fight. She had simply realized that the kingdom she had been defending was made of papier-mâché, ruled by a man who mistook his own narcissism for benevolence. She had spent 5 years earning her freedom, penny by penny, insult by insult, scar by scar. She had paid for her tuition. She had paid for her escape. And now, the ledger was balanced. When the plane touched down at John F. Kennedy International Airport 9 hours later, the morning air was 28 degrees Fahrenheit, smelling of jet fuel, salt, and wet asphalt. Cassie pulled her black cashmere scarf tightly around her throat, dragged her single rolling suitcase through the customs gate, and stepped out onto the curbside. A yellow taxi pulled up, splashing slush onto the curb. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, chewing on a toothpick. Cassie looked up at the pale, sharp blue of the New York sky. "Upper West Side," she said. "Morningside Heights." 3 months later. The Vance Group's quarterly executive meeting was dragging into its 4th hour. And the atmosphere in the 88th floor boardroom was suffocating. Every vice president at the mahogany table sat with their spines locked, eyes glued to their quarterly spreadsheets. No one dared to look at the head of the table. Carter Vance sat in his bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit, a fountain pen turning slowly between his long fingers. He had lost weight. The sharp angles of his jawline were now almost gaunt, making his deep-set eyes look darker, more volatile. "The European logistics acquisition," Carter said, his voice dropping into the quiet room. "Why are the shipping tariffs in Rotterdam 3% higher than our initial projection?" The vice president of international trade swallowed hard, his collar suddenly feeling 2 sizes too small. "Mr. Vance, the Port Authority updated their environmental compliance surcharge last month. We didn't receive the revised brief in time." Snap. The vintage fountain pen in Carter's hand snapped clean in 2. Black ink pooled across the pristine white margin of the report. No one moved. Cassie used to flag environmental surcharge updates 3 weeks before the municipal votes took place, Carter said quietly. He didn't look at the ink staining his fingers. She never had a formal degree in maritime logistics, yet she managed to read through 600 pages of European regulatory drafts while nursing a hangover in my hotel room. The executives held their breath. For the past 90 days, the name Cassie had become a forbidden curse within the company. Carter brought her up without warning, sometimes during marketing reviews, sometimes during private dinners with state governors, sometimes in the middle of negotiations where her absence left an invisible, gaping wound in his operational armor. Carter dropped the broken pieces of the pen into the crystal ashtray. Meeting adjourned. Revise the numbers by 8 tomorrow morning. If they are off by a single basis point, don't bother coming in. He stood up and walked out before the executives could even gather their folders. Harrison was waiting outside the executive suite, holding an iPad. As Carter walked down the private corridor, his stride long and aggressive, Harrison fell into step half a pace behind him. "Did you find her?" Carter asked without turning his head. "Mr. Vance." Harrison's voice was hesitant. "The investigators tracked her movement up to JFK Airport on the night of November 14th. After she cleared immigration, her trail went completely cold." Carter stopped abruptly. He turned, his gaze boring into his assistant. A 5'7" woman with an active passport and $4 million in liquid funds does not simply evaporate into thin air, Harrison. She didn't use her domestic credit cards, Harrison explained, keeping his head low. She didn't contact any former classmates, and her mother and brother have been under 24-hour surveillance. Neither has received a single phone call or transfer. The bank accounts she used were transferred through 3 layers of blind trusts in Switzerland before being liquidated into cashier's checks. She planned this, sir. She had been planning it for at least 18 months. 18 months. Carter felt an icy claw tighten around his throat. 18 months ago, He had taken her to Paris for Fashion Week. She had sat beside him at the front row of the Chanel show, wearing an emerald green gown, smiling whenever he kissed her shoulder for the cameras. And all the while, beneath that radiant, compliant smile, she had been methodically calculating the cost of her own disappearance. What about her father? Carter asked, his voice low and raspy. He is currently serving an 18-month sentence at the provincial detention facility for aggravated assault and extortion, Harrison replied. Our legal team ensured that his bail was denied, as you instructed. Ensure he serves every single day of it, Carter said coldly. And increase the reward for any verified sighting of Cassie to $5 million. Broaden the search to London, Paris, and North America. Understood, Mr. Vance. Carter pushed open the heavy double doors of his penthouse late that night. The space had been professionally sanitized. Chloe's presence had been scrubbed clean within 12 hours of her departure. Every piece of furniture she had touched had been replaced, the master bedroom repainted, the rugs burned. Yet the penthouse didn't feel clean. It felt like a tomb. Carter walked into the kitchen. He didn't turn on the overhead lights. In the pale moonlight filtering through the panoramic windows, he opened the high-end refrigerator. The shelves were immaculate, stocked with imported mineral water, vintage champagnes, and vacuum-sealed steak cuts prepared by his private chef. He reached into the cabinet above the stove. Tucked away in the back corner, forgotten by the cleaning crew, sat a half-empty jar of wild mountain honey and an open box of cheap dried chamomile tea. Carter reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as he took the jar down. He remembered a night 3 years ago. He had returned from a hostile takeover negotiation, his head pounding from 3 bottles of vintage Mouton Rothschild. His stomach violently rejecting everything he had eaten. Cassie had stood by this very stove, wearing an oversized gray sweater, her hair pinned up with a plastic chopstick. She had handed him a mug of warm honey tea. Her tone exasperated and sharp. Drink it, Carter. You have $8 billion in the bank and the digestive tract of an 80-year-old pensioner. If you drop dead, who am I going to squeeze an allowance out of? He had laughed back then, pulling her into his lap, burying his face in the crook of her neck, teasing her for being a mercenary little leech. He had believed her words. He had ignored the fact that she had stayed awake until 4 a.m, gently massaging his temples while he slept, her small, rough hands smelling of lemon water and burn ointment. Carter leaned against the marble counter, clutching the sticky jar of honey against his chest. In the dark, echoing stillness of the $80 million penthouse, the billionaire slowly slid down until his back hit the cold cabinets, his shoulders shaking in soundless, suffocating sobs. The autumn wind in Manhattan carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and damp ginkgo leaves. On the 3rd floor of Columbia University's Lehman Library, the afternoon sunlight poured through the towering arched windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the polished oak tables. Cassie closed her laptop. On the screen was the final draft of her master's thesis proposal. Microcapital allocations in post-industrial urban restoration, a study of independent cultural infrastructure. Her advisor, Professor Arthur Miller, a notoriously demanding man who had spent 30 years advising the World Bank, had scribbled a single line in red ink across the title page, brilliant, pragmatic, and refreshingly devoid of corporate sentimentality. Approved without revisions. You're going to make the rest of our cohort look like slackers, Cassie, a warm voice whispered across the table. Cassie looked up, smiling. Julian Thorne, a doctoral candidate in urban architecture and her frequent research partner, set down 2 paper cups of dark roast coffee. Julian was 28, with unruly sandy brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a quiet, unassuming demeanor that belied the fact that his family had run one of Boston's most prestigious preservation foundations for 3 generations. I have 5 years of lost time to make up for, Cassie replied softly, taking the coffee. Some of us didn't spend our 20s reading theory in comfortable libraries. Julian pulled out a chair, his eyes resting on her left arm. Cassie was wearing an ivory silk blouse with the sleeves rolled loosely to her elbows. Across her left forearm, extending from her wrist to mid-arm, was a long, pale silver-pink scar. She had refused cosmetic laser treatment to remove it. When the doctor at Mount Sinai had offered a series of skin grafting procedures, Cassie had declined with a polite shake of her head. Leave it, she had said. It's a receipt. I like to keep my receipts. Are you attending the Metropolitan Heritage Gala on Friday? Julian asked, leaning forward. The foundation is presenting the preliminary funding for the Brooklyn Warehouse Arts Project. You essentially built the financial model for it. You should be the one presenting the executive summary. Cassie took a sip of her coffee, the bitter warmth spreading through her chest. I'm not a fan of galas, Julian. Too many flashbulbs, too many empty suits. Drinking champagne to feel charitable. Julian chuckled softly. This isn't a high society vanity project, Cassie. It's an independent trust. And besides, there are 3 venture funds flying in from London and Zurich who want to discuss seed funding for your postgrad incubator. You deserve to be in the room. Cassie looked at the scar on her arm, then out the window at the students. Walking across the sun-drenched quad. 2 years. It had been 2 full years since she walked out of that penthouse. She was no longer the girl crouching in the frost outside the university gates, terrified of the shadow of her drunken father. She was no longer the sharp-clawed mistress pacing the perimeter of Carter Vance's life, fighting off desperate socialites for scraps of security. She was Cassie Lynn. An honors candidate, an independent consultant, a woman whose name was on her own lease, her own bank accounts, and her own future. All right, Cassie said, looking back at Julian with clear, untroubled eyes. I'll go. The Metropolitan Heritage Gala was held at the Temple of Dender inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Under the colossal glass atrium, the ancient Egyptian sandstone temple was illuminated by warm, amber spotlights. The reflection of black-tie guests and couture gowns shimmered across the surface of the surrounding reflecting pool. Carter Vance stood near the western pillar of the temple, a glass of untouched, sparkling water in his hand. He hated these transatlantic cultural events. But over the past 18 months, Vance Group had aggressively expanded its private equity holdings in North America, and his board of directors had practically begged him to maintain a visible philanthropic presence in New York. He looked thinner, harder, his presence radiating a cold, impenetrable distance that kept the surrounding socialites and hedge fund managers at a respectful perimeter. Carter, darling, murmured Lady Eleanor Sterling, an aging British patron of the arts whose family controlled significant real estate in Mayfair. You look as though you'd rather be attending an execution. Carter forced a thin, aristocratic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just thinking about market volatility, Eleanor. Nonsense. You've been staring at the museum entrance for the past 40 minutes. As if you're waiting for an apparition. Eleanor tapped his sleeve with her ostrich feather fan. Come, you must meet the young academics who designed the New Brooklyn project. Julian Thorne brought his lead economic analyst tonight. Astonishing young woman, fierce mind, completely unbothered by institutional politics. She reminds me a bit of you, actually. Carter wasn't listening. His gaze drifted aimlessly across the crowded floor. Then, the crowd near the reflection pool parted slightly. A woman walked up the low granite steps. She wore a midnight blue velvet gown, cut in clean, minimalist architectural lines with an open back and long, elegant sleeves that tapered cleanly to her wrists. Her hair was swept up into a sleek, modern chignon, revealing the graceful curve of her neck. She wore no diamond necklaces, no ostentatious emeralds, only a pair of simple pearl studs that cost perhaps $300. She was laughing. It was a real, unguarded laugh, bright, warm, and deeply resonant, as she tilted her head to listen to the sandy-haired young man in wire-rimmed glasses beside her. Carter's hand tightened around his glass so violently that the crystal groaned under the pressure. The room around him seemed to lose all sound. The clinking of crystal flutes, the string quartet playing Debussy, the murmur of hundreds of elite voices, all of it evaporated into a deafening, roaring vacuum. Cassie. It was Cassie. Not the Cassie who wore heavy crimson lipstick to intimidate his board members. Not the Cassie whose eyes were always darting across the room to see who might pose a threat to her survival. This Cassie stood with her back straight, her skin glowing under the soft gallery light, holding a binder of architectural blueprints with the effortless confidence of someone who owned every inch of the floor beneath her feet. Carter took a step forward. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped beast. Excuse me, he muttered, brushing past Lady Eleanor so abruptly that her champagne nearly spilled. He didn't care. He couldn't care. For 730 days, he had woken up in an empty bed, staring at an empty kitchen, haunted by the ghost of a woman he had broken with his own hands. He had paid millions to private investigators, tracked down false leads across 4 continents, and spent sleepless nights reading through old financial audits just to see her initials on the approvals. And here she was. Cassie was explaining the 3-tier capital allocation model to a senior director from the Ford Foundation when she felt the shift in the air behind her. It was an instinct honed over 5 years of surviving in the presence of predators, a sudden, sharp drop in atmospheric pressure, the scent of expensive cedarwood cologne, custom Tuscan leather, and raw, suffocating possessiveness. She didn't freeze. She didn't drop her champagne flute. She finished her sentence with smooth, measured cadence, which ensures that 35% of the commercial retail revenue is reinvested directly into the Community Workshop Fund. Thank you for your time, Mr. Vance Smith. She turned around slowly. Carter stood less than 3 feet away. Up close, she could see the changes in him. The subtle silver threads at his temples, the faint lines etched around his mouth, the dark, bruised circles beneath his eyes that no amount of wealth could conceal. He was looking at her as if she were a miracle he was afraid to touch. "Cassie," he whispered. His voice was ragged, stripped of all its former imperious arrogance. Julian Thorne noticed the tension instantly, stepping forward half an inch. "Is everything all right, Cassie?" Cassie placed a gentle, reassuring hand on Julian's sleeve. Her touch was calm, familiar, and unhurried. "It's fine, Julian. Just an acquaintance from home." She looked back at Carter, her expression shifting into a polite, professional mask of mild curiosity. "Mr. Vance. What a surprise to see you in New York." "Mr. Vance." The formal, icy greeting felt like a serrated blade sliding between Carter's ribs. "Cassie, can we speak privately? Please." The word please from Carter Vance's mouth sounded grotesque, foreign, and deeply broken. In 5 years, she had never heard him use that word with anyone, not with ministers, not with foreign dignitaries, and certainly never with her. Cassie glanced at her watch, a simple, stainless steel piece with a black leather band. "I have a panel presentation in 20 minutes, Mr. Vance. If Vance Group is interested in reviewing the public tender for the Brooklyn infrastructure bonds, you can schedule an appointment through Julian's office." "I don't care about the bonds." Carter snapped, his voice rising just enough to draw glances from 2 nearby museum trustees. He caught himself, his hands clenching at his sides. "Cassie, I'm begging you. 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes." Cassie looked at him for a long, quiet moment. In his eyes, she saw the desperate, wild turmoil of a man who had finally realized the price of everything he had thrown away. There was no triumph in her heart, no bitter satisfaction, no burning desire for revenge. There was only a vast, serene emptiness. She turned to Julian. "Give me 5 minutes, Julian. Wait for me by the auditorium." Julian hesitated, his eyes lingering on Carter's tense frame, then nodded. "I'll hold the front row seats for you." Cassie stepped off the granite platform, walking toward the quiet, shadowed corridor that led to the Egyptian wing's secondary gallery. Carter followed her closely, his footsteps heavy, as if he feared she might dissolve into the shadows if he blinked. They stopped beside a towering limestone relief depicting an ancient harvest. Cassie turned to face him, crossing her arms lightly over her chest. "You have 5 minutes, Carter. Say what you came to say." Carter looked at her, his throat working convulsively. Now that she was standing before him, the 1,000 apologies he had rehearsed in the dark corners of his private jet sounded hollow, pathetic, and utterly inadequate. "I saw the video," he said, the words tumbling out in a raw, broken rush. "The night you left. I saw what Chloe did. I saw her grab your arm. I saw the dossier." Cassie didn't react. Her brows remained level, her lips parted in mild, distant attention. "And?" she asked. "I destroyed her," Carter said, his voice trembling with a terrifying intensity. "Her family, her network, every single person who helped her orchestrate that lie, I ruined them all, Cassie. I put your father in prison where he can never touch you again. I bought out his debts, I had his parole revoked. He will rot there." "My father was already a broken old coward," Cassie said calmly. "Putting him in a cage didn't require $8 billion, it just required someone willing to stop paying him off. But thank you for saving the taxpayers some paperwork." "Cassie, that's not all." Carter reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo. His hand emerged with an antique velvet box. He flipped it open with a trembling thumb. Inside lay the fiery, 15-carat diamond ring. Beside it was an intricately engraved titanium key card. "The penthouse is still yours. I never transferred the deed. I bought 3 surrounding properties in Mayfair, Manhattan, and Lake Como, all registered under your name, with no strings attached. No prenuptial agreements, no conditions. Half of Vance Group's private equity portfolio has been restructured into an irrevocable trust in your name." He held the box out to her, his knees actually buckling slightly, as if the sheer weight of his remorse was pulling him to the marble floor. "Come back, Cassie. I don't care about the money. I don't care about high society. I was blind, I was an arrogant fool who didn't know what love looked like because I had never been given it in my entire life. But I know now. I know. It was you. It was always you." Cassie looked down at the velvet box. The diamond caught the ambient spotlight, scattering sharp, fiery prisms of white and blue across the limestone walls. It was worth at least $12 million. 2 years ago, She would have looked at that ring and calculated how many years of freedom it could buy her. She would have smiled her sweet, poisonous smile, taken the box, and endured his cold, indifferent touches in the dark just to secure her survival. Now, she slowly raised her left arm. She pulled back the tailored velvet sleeve of her gown. Under the harsh museum lighting, the silver-pink burn scar stretched across her pale skin, jagged, thick, and permanent. Carter's breath hitched in his throat. He looked at the scar as if someone had pressed a red-hot iron against his own eyes. "Do you know why I didn't get this scar removed, Carter?" she asked softly. Carter couldn't speak. A single tear broke from his eye, tracking down the sharp hollow of his cheek. "Because every time I look at it, I remember that night," Cassie said, her voice smooth and entirely devoid of hatred. "I remember standing in my own kitchen, smelling my own burning skin, watching you look at me as if I were a piece of filth you had stepped on. I was wrong." Carter choked out. "Cassie, please. You weren't wrong, Carter. You were just being yourself." Cassie let her sleeve fall back down, covering the scar. "You're a man who buys things. You bought my youth, you bought my loyalty, you bought my tolerance. And when a shiny new doll caught your eye, you threw the old one against the wall to see if it would break. I didn't break you." Carter reached out frantically, his fingers inches from her shoulder, but stopped, terrified to touch her without permission. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. I didn't break because I spent my entire childhood being beaten by experts." Cassie laughed softly, a sound so clear and bright it made Carter's chest ache with unbearable agony. "You didn't break me, Carter. But you did cure me." "Cure you of what?" "Of you," she said simply. The silence returned, vast and bottomless. Carter stood frozen, the velvet box trembling in his palm. "Cassie, did you ever love me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Even for a second? Or was it all just calculations?" Cassie looked into his bloodshot eyes. She remembered the night he had pulled her up from the frost outside the university gates. She remembered the nights she had held him while he shook with fever from food poisoning, whispering to him that everything would be all right. She remembered the quiet, pathetic little dream she had harbored during her 23rd birthday, wondering if perhaps, against all odds, they might build a real home together. "I loved you so much, Carter, that I drank poison for you at every dinner table in the city," she said softly. "I loved you so much that I was willing to be the villain in everyone else's story just so you could be the king." A flicker of desperate, tragic hope ignited in Carter's eyes. "And then," Cassie continued, her smile widening into something breathtakingly radiant, "I realized that the king was just a little boy who thought love was something you could buy at an auction." She stepped past him. "Keep the ring, Mr. Vance. Give it to your next project. I pay my own rent now." Carter didn't turn around. He stood in the shadowed corridor of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, listening to the steady, rhythmic click of her low heels moving further and further away. Each step was light. Each step was certain. He looked down at the 15-carat diamond ring in his hand. In the dim light, the diamond was cold, hard, and utterly lifeless. It had no heartbeat. It could not brew tea when his stomach burned. It could not stay awake until 4 in the morning to soothe his nightmares. It could not look at him with fierce, untamed devotion. It was just compressed carbon. 100 yards away, the doors of the Grace Rainey Rogers Auditorium opened. A round of warm, enthusiastic applause rippled through the hall as Cassie Lynn stepped onto the brightly lit stage. She adjusted the microphone, smiled warmly at the audience of scholars, architects, and international directors, and clicked to the first slide of her presentation. Her voice, carrying through the speakers, was steady, brilliant, and completely free. Outside the museum, the New York night was crisp and clear. Above the towering canopy of Central Park, the stars were invisible behind the city's electric glow, but the sky was vast, infinite, and wide open. Carter Vance walked down the grand limestone steps of the museum alone, clutching an empty box in his pocket, stepping out into a cold, endless winter that would never end. And inside the warmth of the hall, Cassie Lynn looked up at the light, took a deep breath, and began to speak.